All right, everyone, lock in. It's that time again for a super long video because we're going to be talking about gear progression from beginner to endgame 2025 edition. And maybe once or twice a year, I like to talk about gear progression, whether you're a beginner or you're looking to push endgame. Whenever they make huge changes, I just wanted to update these videos. So I took a lot of notes to make sure everything I'm saying is accurate, and I also have a lot of videos and playlists you can watch. I'll leave a bunch of links in the description, and we're going to talk about it. So whether you're a new player or not, we're going to start from the beginner section. So if you are starting out for the first time, I would recommend playing on a seasonal character. How do you know it's seasonal? It'll have this yellow circle thingy above your character, and that means it's seasonal. So the first thing you're gonna get is basically Naru gear. It's kind of like light blue, and it's super easy to enhance. Even if you're a beginner, chances are you'll be moving out of that on day one. So it's not really important to talk about. It just teaches you how to go about enhancing, and basically all of the Naru gear looks like this, but the equivalent. And then once you get all your Naru gear to, I think it's either accessories go up to like duo or something, but that's not the important part. The armor and weapons, when you get it to PEN, they give you an option to convert it to Tuvala. And Tuvala is all this. It's basically the yellow seasonal gear. And your goal throughout all the seasons is to get everything to PEN, the weapon to DEC, or, you know, and then we'll talk about that exchanging after seasons. But the first thing you're going to do is basically play through the seasons, get all your gear to at least PEN, and one of them will push to DEC for an exchange for your post-season stuff. So, yeah, when you play through seasons, all of this should just go to PEN over time. What you're going to have is like a seasonal quest line, and basically you just make sure to do all your weeklies. Something that I would recommend is, well, I guess one of the things over here is to start doing these, whether you're on seasons or not, simply because infinite potions are going to be important. So getting them early on is a lot better than later. And then there's also a weekly quest line where you get the enhancing materials, which would give you a bunch of time-filled Blackstones. This is essentially currency on seasonals that allow you to upgrade your Tuvala, and or if you're just playing it, it gives you more item loot scrolls and everything, fail stacks, which are always nice to have. And yeah, so this is essentially seasonal currency that you're going to be using to get everything to PEN and so on. Now, if you have any questions about that, for the sake of not making this video like 2 hours long, just ask me. But your end game goal is to get all your Tuvala pieces in every circle to PEN, and then we'll talk about pushing past PEN for weapons. So while you're on seasons, there are a few things I'd recommend doing, just because like it doesn't really matter if you do it now or later, but doing it later just feels worse because you could be doing something more impactful. But anyway, the first thing I would do is start the Magnus quest line, and it's the Abyss one, the Magnus. It's 117 quests, which sounds like a lot, but realistically it's not too bad. The reason why is at the end of it, it gives you a special gift, and that special gift was somewhere, I think, hold on, is essentially like a PEN boss gear for your armor. And what you pick one piece of your helmet, chest, shoes, or gloves, and I would choose the one that is the most expensive on the market at the time, simply because, you know, that's the most expensive, and then you just save money going for it. So that's one piece of your gear already done. And before graduating from seasons, you would be getting to level 61. You complete the season pass at 60, but there's no reason to rush the season anymore because, you know, it's just graduate when you feel like it. So for beginners who are just trying out different things, usually there's a permanent XP bonus on seasonals that is like plus 1,000 or something, so you just level up faster. So getting to level 61 in your Y tab, if you're on console, is probably different. Basically, getting to level 61 will give you a free PEN Blackstar, maybe a Tet if that's still in the game as well. So you essentially should have two, one Tet, one PEN. And that's how you get some gear that you would use post-season. So let's say right now, all our gear looks like this. And now you have one piece of gear that's PEN because you did the Magnus. You can't wear it yet, but you have it. So that's always good. And then you have one Blackstar. The Blackstar that I would choose, because it gives you a box that allows you to pick from your main hand, your Awakening, and your sub-weapon, is I would always choose the main hand first, even if you play Awakening, simply because the main hand gives you more accuracy, whereas this one is like a little bit more AP. But trust me when I say the accuracy does come in handy, whether you're a PvPer or you just, plan on pushing forward for, anything else, higher grind spots, you want to do some PvP in the future. So the main hand is always important because accuracy. I wish that they would equalize the AP, so whether you play Succession or Awakening, the accuracy would be like split between all of these. So like you kind of get more later on, but yeah, it's just kind of like the main hand gives so much accuracy and the Awakening doesn't. So that's why main hand first, followed by, I guess if you chose the Tet on your Blackstar, you could choose something else. But personally, if they still do give the Tet one, I would choose the Tet on the Offhand, and we'll talk about that in a second. So a few minutes ago, we talked about getting your weapons to from pen to deck, which is essentially 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And once you get it to deck, which is the highest upgrade currently, you can exchange one weapon to another PEN Blackstar. So essentially you get two PEN Blackstars, one for free and one for significantly cheaper than buying it off the market or self-enhancing it. So then, in theory, assuming you followed correctly, you should have your PEN from level 61 Blackstar, and then your second PEN should be your Awakening. A lot of people have asked me, should I just go Sovereign and get two of them at once? And the answer is no. Simply because Sovereign is an endgame item, and like this is what it looks like. Basically, it's very hard to upgrade it. Well, not hard, it's just expensive. And if you're lower geared and you're just like, oh, I want to get the best things early on, upgrading it going forward is just like a really endgame thing, to the point where you won't be able to grind the highest spots yet, and you're not making as much silver as endgame players are. So it's better to get all your weapons to Blackstar first, and then go into Sovereign later on once your gear is ready for it. So to give you the realistic reason is just because Sovereign is very expensive to enhance and you can't buy it off the market. So it's one of those things where you're going to have a lot more gear upgrades in terms of everything else before Sovereign. And that's what we're talking about today. So with that said, assuming your gear looks like this, you have one piece of your armor done, you have two PEN Blackstars, and the Tet one that they give, that's why I said you should choose your Tet Blackstar on your Offhand. That way you're doing maximum damage output, whatever you're doing. Awakening, I believe, if they haven't changed it, is about like 30% of not like sheet AP, but the damage on, like, you see that 114 to 123, it's like hidden AP to your main hand. So essentially, if it was like Tet or something, you would still get it, but double pens is always better. And then the Tet Blackstar is, something you work on in the future. So with that said, once you graduate from seasons, let's assume you're level 61, you have a few pieces that you couldn't wear yet. The one thing you're going to be doing is probably thinking about your Offhand. So you're like, oh, okay, so I have 2 PEN Blackstars and 1 Tet. But before we go for a PEN Blackstar, you're probably looking at your gear pieces like, what gear should I push first? And a TLDR would be whatever gives you the most AP or DP stats for the least amount of money. And the way you look at that is just by the central market and just look at the prices for the pieces you need. And you can see which one gives you the most. But with that said, I guess over time, once you have PEN Tuvala, that is the equivalent of Tet boss gear and going forward. So what you could do after that is either, just hold on to it when you're grinding. You either save up silver to buy the PEN boss gear, or you can just, self-enhance it yourself. Usually buying is cheaper on average. And when it comes to accessories, the order you should go for is the necklace first, followed by belt or rings, and then earrings will be last. Earrings are kind of the flex spot because there are multiple choices, but the necklace will always give the most AP, and it scales a little bit higher. So for example, I guess at Kharazad level, everything is +1, whereas a necklace is +2. But either way, we'll look at this. And if you were to ask me a few years ago what you should do, the answer was always necklace and everything. Deboreka versus Kharazad, we'll talk about that in a second. But for example, let's see, a Tet Deboreka necklace is 34 AP, right? If we look at a Deboreka belt, same thing as 21, and it, just a lot more AP for the necklace first. So that's the order I would do. And assuming you're at this point, some breakpoints of AP are 261. That puts you in the bracket to grind efficiently at the 260 spot, and 260 is generally where a lot of the more notable spots go on. It's 260, 280, 300, 310, and so on. So after seasons, assuming you have your black stars, you have at least one piece of gear, I have a feeling that you're probably going to be around, 260, 270, with around 330, 340 AP or DP. So your goal is to probably get more DP at this point because you're 280. You can grind a lot of spots just fine. However, the higher the grind spots, the harder they hit. So people always meme and say that just don't get hit, which is, actually true to an extent. But realistically, unless you're locked in 100% of the time, people are going to make mistakes. And so the gear progression I would go is probably whichever one is cheapest. Let's take a quick look right now. Let's look at the armors. Okay, so quick TLDR. If you can just save up silver and buy a Deboreka, that skips a lot of steps and grinding. But if you're still on the stage of helmets, I personally would choose Griffin over Gaiath, simply because if you look at the differences, Gaiath gives you 100 HP on the helmet from the item effect. The Griffin gives you 5% resistances. And the reason why I choose this is because it's 2025 and everyone is geared these days. So resistance 5% will actually be generally more notable than 100 extra HP. Is it a big difference? No, not really. But if you plan on doing any sort of PvP, not getting CC'd is a lot more valuable than, 100 random HP. So will it matter? No, I think the right answer is choose whichever one is cheaper. And in this case, let's see, PEN Griffin is about 14.5. That's kind of a lot, actually. And PEN Gaiath is about 12. So if your only goal is PvE, just get the one that's cheaper. But if you take a while and you only grind a little bit a day and, just whatever, just get whatever you want. Your ultimate goal is Deboreka. And let's take a look at armors. Armors is the only one that requires a different amount of Capra stones. So for every fallen god, it takes one PEN boss gear at Capra 10. So at PEN, you put Capra stones into your gear. and then you get a flame, and then you do a quest to exchange it into Fallen God. So you're gonna notice something. For example, a PEN Red Nose is 14 billion. A PEN Dim Tree is 9 billion, and you're like, oh, so I should get the cheaper one. And in theory, yes. However, just make sure to look at the Capra Stone price. Maybe Google a Capris chart of how much it would take to get your pen gear to Capris 10. The Dim Tree generally takes more Capra Stones, which is why the armor itself is cheaper. So depending on the market, one could be significantly cheaper than the other. And your ultimate goal is to get the Fallen God armor. Personally, if you want to skip all that stuff and not have to think about it, just save up a bunch of silver, buy like a Pride a Duo. I would personally just buy a Duo because you skip a few enhancing steps. And then we just do that. So after this, if you're planning, actually, let me talk about everything before we go into it. Then I'll talk about what fail stacks you use to enhance it and everything, what I personally did. So gloves and shoes are where things branch off into two separate paths of DR and Evasion. Not every class is the same. However, when you're getting them for the first time, I would just recommend everyone to go the Begs route early on. And then once you're at the stage of the game where, you know, everything matters, that's when you switch to Evasion if you want to, or you stay with DR depending on your class. I'll talk about how you can figure out all of that in a bit. So if you look at it, Begs gloves, they kind of tweaked it over time. So what you look at in this one is you look at the amount of evasion and damage reduction. So the small text at the bottom, it'll be different than the Lieber's gloves. So you see how the Lieber's gives more evasion, which, you know, people think bigger number is better. And to an extent, at very end game, it is. But when you're early on, it doesn't matter as much. So ultimately, I would just recommend more accuracy to people, more damage reduction. So I guess, how do I put this? Damage reduction. Let's say you get hit by, you know, an enemy, and it would normally do, I don't know, just make up a number, 100 damage, right? Damage reduction is like, instead of taking 100, you'd probably take like 80 damage or something. Evasion, on the other hand, is like you evade it fully and not get, you know, the extra CC damage, like back attack extra, whatever. Or you take fat damage and the DR does not do quite as much. So it's either like you take 0 or minimal, or you take like 50 damage. So I think overall, especially for newer players, DR is the way to go. And then you go into the Dawn's Glove, which is the Fallen God for endgame players. Blue is the DR version, damage reduction, and green is evasion. Once you get the gloves, you can exchange it back and forth no matter what like tier it is. So let's say you're at base or even Tet. There's a quest line where you can exchange from blue to green and keep the same stats it has. So it doesn't matter if you feel like you chose the wrong one. You can just do the quest line. It's a very minimal amount of silver to exchange it, and you can go back and forth. So no big deal. Now we go to the shoes. This is the same thing as we talked about here. Uragon's is the DR. Muskin is evasion. Blue DR. Green evasion. So now that we talked about the armor pieces, what I want to talk about is the enhancing fail stacks that I used for Fallen God. All of my pieces were self-enhanced. I didn't buy any of them, and I struggled on some pieces more than the other, but all of them used, you know, relatively the same fail stacks. If you have a base one, so from base to pry, I would probably start at an 80 stack, maybe go up to like 100, 110. And then if you have an extra 100, from pry to duo, you can go from like 100 to 130 stack, and then hope you get it from there. And then from duo to try, this is where the price gap kind of like doubles in a way. So Personally, from duo to try, I would start at like a 150 stack, maybe 160, and then push it up to like a 200, just because the price range kind of high and it's a lot easier. Now from try to tet, you see how the price, is triple of that. I personally, for 3 of my 4 pieces, I used a stack between 245 to 250 for 3 of them. And the last one I struggled with, and I got kind of tilted and hit it on like a mid 270s, which even then I would still recommend doing that because, nowadays building a fail stack isn't too bad. And because prices of things are significantly more expensive, so yeah, if you were to use a like 270 and up for a 220 mil item, I still don't even think that's a bad idea, just because of how expensive it is. And I guess a question, should you enhance it or should you buy it? On average, I think most people can hit tet from try cheaper than it costs to buy it. Obviously, that's talking about averages and RNG, but most people, I think, are able to get it in under 200 billion. So there's that. But everyone else, you ultimately do what you think is best for you. That's just my opinion. And so let's say you are currently right now 4 fallen gods, and whether you're at try or tet, your ultimate goal is to get to 401 DP, because that's the bracket where it generally feels safe, and pushing past that gives diminishing returns. And what these stats look like is, how people are like, oh, you should get this bracket and this one. So let me show you how to look at this. You see how there's a number. Let's take the Awakening AP, 351. 351 is my sheet number over here, and the parentheses is plus 220. That plus 220 is what we call bracket AP. So essentially it adds up, right? And then when people say monster AP totals, you take this number. This is your stats, and then plus all the buffs that you have on. These are like all your crystals, artifact combinations, and everything. Basically, all your stats combined together, and then it gives you a number. Okay, so now that we talked about how to go about progressing your weapons and armor, so what should you do? Let's say you are, try Fallen Gods, all of them, and then, maybe you're struggling on the boots because they're kind of expensive. That's okay. That's your next goal. That's when you start thinking about going for a Vel's Heart. I would recommend going to Vel every week if you can, putting an order on it as soon as possible, assuming they are not sold out. Let me check, at least on... It's better to put an order on the concentrated magic, just because people sell these instead of crafting the main heart and then selling it. People will sell them both, but like more people will sell the concentrated, so you could just make it yourself. It probably costs a little bit more, but if you want it immediately, this is probably better to do. Okay, so assuming your next upgrades are like, 20 billion silver each, what should you do? Now is when you start looking into artifacts, different Lightstone combinations, maybe investing in crystals. Believe it or not, crystals are very important, and I have a video talking about every single set. It's about like a 30-minute video, so I'll leave that in the description if you want to see very in-depth detail of why I use every set and what each one of these is. But for the most part, this is my general go-to. You could swap out, Fortitude with, the Precise Destruction. But once again, to save time, I'll leave a link in the description to my crystal video. It's kind of a long one, so it's also more detailed in that one of why I chose everything and what works for you. So with that said, start investing in crystals. And we talk about the prices in that video as well, of like what orders, what you could do, budget options, beginner friendly crystals as well. And so, yeah, just watch that one. Now, what are we going to talk about? Accessories. Deboreka versus Kharazad. I'm going to assume you are roughly around 270 to 300 AP at this point. And your AP is probably like 380 to 401 plus. You're thinking about pushing more AP. So as we talked about before, you can basically, if you don't like enhancing, you can save up enough silver to buy Deboreka accessories. If you get a Tet, this will be the equivalent of a PEN Kharazad. If you buy a PEN Deboreka, that's the equivalent of a Nav Kharazad. And all you have to do is like a 5-minute quest down in the is it Mountain of Eternal Winter, or let me see, it's somewhere down here and within, you know, somewhere down here. Either way, I have a quest video for that, but you just exchange it, and then it's very simple. So to craft Kharazad, it takes a bunch of Essence of Dawn, and these are going to be probably your bottleneck all the way to endgame. Essence of Dawn is a material that you use to upgrade Kharazad. The way you get it is from high-end grind spots, or you can enhance yellow grade accessories to Tet or Pen and melt them down. Usually it's inefficient to melt down accessories, but some people are impatient and they would rather spend an extra like 20 billion silver and get like 20 less, which is actually expensive. So if you want to do things efficiently, just put an order on like 10 at a time and then just hold on to it for whenever you need it. I would start doing that now if you can. So, in my experience, enhancing Kharazad up to Nav is generally cheaper than buying a Pen Debo and then, you know, just getting it to Nav directly. One has no RNG and doesn't require Cron Stones, Failstacks, and trust me, I understand people who just want to save up 200 billion silver and then skip the entire enhancing process. Trust me, I understand. However, if you want to enhance yours from like even at Pen, let's say you get like a Tet Debo in exchange, and even if you want to go to the halfway point and self-enhance it from there, it's probably cheaper to enhance it to Nav than it is to, you know, just buy it outright. So I think there's a whole sheet of data and math that people do. And when people say enhancing it, everyone talks about averages, not do you get RNG carried or are you at the worst case scenario. But like if you're using optimal stacks and everything, we talk about should you be the average, and that's what we aim for. So yeah, your goal is to ultimately get Kharazad. Now I wanted to talk about earrings for a little bit, simply because these are the most versatile slots and things you can actually change. So you may be looking at this and you're like, okay, so Kharazad, Nav, 20 AP, Oct, 19. However, you see things like Distos that give 21, and you're like, oh, okay, bigger number, better. To an extent, it's something that only you can choose, simply because what happens if you have double Distos? You would be going down in DP because each Pen Disto gives 5. If you have 10, it's 4. So multiply that by 2, so minus 10 DP. That makes it a little bit harder, actually, for some people. And if you go down 10 DP, that actually can feel a little bit scary, depending on the grind spot you're at. But with that said, hold on, let me actually fix that. All right, so we're talking about Distos. Where was it? Let me show you the difference. So the reason why people will get Distos, if these 2 AP that you get versus a Nav or something put you up into a new bracket, we talked about brackets a few minutes ago on how to find it. If it puts you into a new bracket, generally it will be slightly more AP if you're min-maxing. Or people just like to see bigger number better, right? With that said, if you are using the Kharazad version, what happens is it unlocks a slot down here. So 1 crystal slot per Kharazads, right? Does it make sense? Like 6 Kharazad accessories, 6 crystals. If you do the exchange, it gives you the Djinns by default. So you don't even have to buy them, it just kind of gives it to you. What this does is it gives you +4 AP. So essentially it equals out, and the AP itself will be the same in terms of your sheet stats, whether you have Kharazad or Distos. The downside is with Distos, you get bracket AP. With Kharazad, you get your total stats. So it's the same, but Distos are admittedly slightly cheaper. However, you do lose the 10 DP, which is actually valuable in my opinion. So even if you had the same gear I did, but you had double PEN Distos, you would be -10 DP with the same overall AP I do. And so defensives at endgame are more important, because at a certain point, you're just like, okay, I just want to not die. And that's it, pretty important. So in my opinion, I would personally push Kharazad, because that is the end game anyway. So you might as well start going for the end game gear progression instead of a dead end upgrade. And what I mean by dead end is when you look at a piece of gear, right? And you're like, okay, so what happens next? This is a dead end upgrade. You can no longer push it any further than this. Now you're stuck with it. And when you get to the point where you have to push Kharazad, you're going to have to sell this or, melt it for Essence of Dawns, which is actually a good thing. Basically, you're losing money on taxes that you could have spent enhancing your gear yourself. But if you're going for this early on, it still goes forward progression, and then you'd get further AP past, Distos and everything. So TLDR, go Kharazad. I understand why people do Distos, because in a small window, you do more damage. But at the end of the day, you're taking one extra step, because later on, you're going to have to sell it or do something with it to get rid of it. Instead, you could use that silver that you got to, just start upgrading going forward. So efficiently, I think this is the right play. Okay, so now, when all your gear pieces are, roughly 30 billion silver and upgrade, you're probably like, oh, what do I do now? Now is when you start pushing your PEN Blackstar, because the difference between a PEN Kutum at Capris 20 versus a PEN Blackstar is more monster AP when you're PvEing, and it's slightly better at an accuracy trade-off. So Kutum at max Capris at PEN will give you more accuracy, whereas the PEN Blackstar gives you slightly more monster AP, which is a lot more valuable. Also, I personally think Blackstar looks nicer than, Kutum. But either way, that's beside the point. If you are a PvPer, you get a Nuver, and then you push Capris into that one whenever you want to. And yeah, I guess that's it. So here's some extra, little off-topic pro tips. If you plan on doing any sort of bosses like Calamity 8, 9, and 10, for this one, you know how over here it requires at least 330 AP. Calamity 9 Sangoon requires at least 350 AP. And you're like, oh, how do I get 350? So even if you're at 320 and want to do Calamity 8, right? And you're like, I don't know how to get 10 AP so fast. Base Nuver pushes your gear and your AP up a lot higher. And in my personal experience, using a Nuver or a Kutum or Blackstar equivalent, it doesn't really feel that much different when you're doing high-end bosses, simply because a a lot of the mechanics in those fights are, you know, either high damage or one shot. So it doesn't matter if you're running Blackstar or Nuver. It feels the same if you take damage. If you're pushing a time, like, you know, you like leaderboard pushing, obviously Blackstar is going to be better for more damage output. But if you're just trying to do it and get your weekly clear and you need that extra 10 or so AP to push you into Calamity 8 or 9, just getting a PEN Nuver will give you that like 11 plus AP. And if that pushes you into a new bracket, obviously that's a good thing. So yeah, in general, Blackstars are for PvE grinding, Nuvers are for PvP. But if you're trying to do very specific things that are AP locked, that's how you get around it. Another tip that I can give you for all of you grinders out there, use a ladle or an alchemy flask. One of these things. Both of them give you 100 weight limit. It doesn't matter if these are at base, so +0, or pen, they still give you 100 weight. So when you're grinding, you should always be like, you should always have the ladle or a flask equipped for that +100 weight. Allows you to grind for slightly longer. Pro tip. All right, so we talked about crystals, artifacts, and lightstones and everything. I want to run down some lightstone combinations. Depending on your gear, let me just make sure we're all on the same page for a second. So let's pick a random spot. All right. Pick something more on the higher end. Hong Lim is a fun one to pick. So this is your gear. This is what the game recommends you should be at. What you really want to look at is total stats. 730, 390, 850 is restricted like hard cap, essentially. How do you get this number in total stats? Remember how we talked about your stats over here? This number is full buffed. Then you add this number, whether you're Awakening or Succession, plus AP against monsters from all your crystals, artifacts, lightstone combos, everything. And then extra species damage that you use. And essentially you add those up, and that's your total AP stats, right? Good. That's what you want to look at. Now, we're talking about species damage. So, for most things that don't have a species, I would personally start looking into a set called All Out Attack. This gives you the most damage output. However, you take more damage because it reduces your DR and evasion. So basically, it's a glass cannon set. It's good, but it also requires you to have a little bit more gear as well. And species damage over here, we have Demi-Human and Commosylvian. So basically, you get 3 of the species type and 1 iridescent, and you get, like, I think it's plus 30 total. So like plus 5 from each lightstone, plus 15 from the set. So 15 plus 15, 30, depending on where you grind. Both Commosylvian and Demi-Human are very popular, and, you know, a lot of meta spots are either one of these two. I think Demi-Human is a little bit more popular than Commosylvians, but ultimately it really just depends on where you grind, and after that, that's cool. I have another video entirely of all my things, so if you want to see more in detail, there's that. But I like defensive. I'm trying to get a second all DR artifact, and that will replace this one. Fat DR, life skillers, we have watched the video. For PvP, we have straight up human damage, and this is another, you know, plus 24 damage to humans, and it's mostly for PvP, but there are human type enemies in PvE that you could use as well. In that case, you would use Kabuas for most damage output for PvE, and then that's about it. So yeah, now that we got weapons done, armor's done, assuming you have your Alchemy Stone, artifacts, Lightstones done, crystals, you know, those are ever changing, but, you know, for now, if you watch that video, you're caught up. Now is when you start looking into sovereign weapons. So I'm going to assume all of you guys are at least PEN Kharazad and, you know, triple PEN Blackstar. And now you're thinking about, okay, so now I got to get another Blackstar or the 100 Embers from Morning Light bosses. And it's time to push Sovereign. Once again, I would always push the main hand first because more accuracy is always nicer. But, you know, in this case, when you push Sovereign, because it's very expensive, I would actually choose the one you play most. So if you are Awakening, choose the Awakening weapon. If you're Succession, choose the main hand. Or you should, for the most part, be established and, you know, have a decent amount of accuracy. By this point, you're roughly around like 280 to 310 AP. And so at this point, you should have a general idea of how to go about numbers from there. And I would just choose whichever one you do. So for me, personally, I play Awakening more. That's why my Awakening is done. But with the price of everything now, I would just probably choose whichever one you play. Yeah. So with that said, I think that's basically it in terms of gear progression for now. Well, maybe we'll re-talk about this in 6 months from now. But assuming your gear is like 310, 320-ish, that should be enough to grind every single spot in the game and possibly efficiently for most spots, or at least 99% of them. And all you have to do is, you know, build fail stacks, keep cronning everything, hope for the best. And let me see, are there any other tips that I can give you guys before heading out? Aside from using the ladle for the extra weight limit, Nuver gives you plus 11 to 18, depending on how much is Caprist. If you try to do Calamity 8 to 10 bosses. Let's see, we talked about crystals. Critical AP points. So in one of my, or in a few of my videos where we talked about the best spots to grind for silver, XP, Agris, and all that stuff, we have a bunch of those videos. I basically talk about grind spots at critical AP points that are, you know, like give you the most bracket AP per sheet. So it's generally around 261, 280, I think it's 289, and then 309. And then after that is just, after 309, it's just get as much as you can. For DP brackets, 401 is the goal. Obviously, more is better. And then you should be able to hit 401 with full try. You don't even have to go TET, but at full try, that's generally the way to go, assuming you have a PEN Blackstar. That should give you a bunch of it. And then the Exalted Vel's Heart, which is your Vel's plus an upgrade. And that should give you another +4. And even if you're not into 401, what you could do is, you know, play a little bit more defensively. Or I don't know if I'd really recommend this for like people who are just getting into the end game. An option is to put a DR crystal in. You lose 25 AP and gain plus 20 to 25, basically, depending on if you have a 1 all the way to a Jin. That could put you up into a higher thing, but I don't think I'd recommend that for PvE. But that's an option. Let's see, what else is there to talk about? After that, it really is just saving silver, buying Cron Stones, building fail stacks. That's about it. So I think I covered everything. We talked about crystals, artifacts, Lightstones, gear progression, extra things to do, infinite potions. Infinite potions, you just do your weekly or buy them. I'd recommend buying them. I know someone has to grind it and sell it on the market. Just hope that you're the person who can buy it off the market. That's straight up what it is. Yeah, in terms of elixirs and potions, add these to your... I guess if you're grinding, it doesn't matter where you pick. Just find a spot you like see the number over here when you're full buffed with everything. Red number bad, green number good. So try to get yours as close to it as possible. And then if you're over the number, more AP is always better. If you are, you know, you don't meet the restricted. But if you don't meet the restricted, what you should do is use Perfume of Courage to get the plus 20. And if that pushes you past the limit, Deep Sea Elixirs will do more, you know, special attack damage. So it's good to have both of them. It really depends on where you grind. Harmonies are better than full blues. They cost more, but if you're serious about pushing endgame and elixir full buffed and everything, that's about it. So yeah, with that said, I think that's about it. And I tried not to go over too much and make this video too long. This video is 45 minutes. That's shorter than I thought it would be, but I'll leave a link in the description to a lot of the videos I talked about, including artifacts, crystals, maybe some grind spot videos, and a lot of other things I talked about. So with that said, I want to say thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and there's probably a bunch of questions that I missed as well. So if you have anything, you could ask in the comments, or you could join the Discord down below. And in my Discord, we have a channel for people who need gear help. You basically, here's how it works. Post a screenshot of your gear, be like, where do I go from here? And I'll point you in the right direction. If you need help with anything else, or want to watch any other guides, we have channels for that. You don't even have to talk to anyone, to be honest. You can just go in, watch it. I have an updated guide channel, so anything you may need is probably there. And yeah, so with that said, always happy to read the comments and everything and point people in the right direction, whether you're a beginner or just trying to get better at this game. So yeah, I think that's about it. Thanks so much for watching once again, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.